Finally, we have reached the end of the 1950s. Although 1959 is the last year of the decade, it would sow the seeds of chaos for years to come. Armed uprisings, man-made disasters, and murder were just a few of the horrible events that would happen before this eventful year reached its end. A lot of good things happened too, but we're not going to focus on that. Let's begin with a story about what happens when incompetent managers get people killed. Knox Mine Disaster. Northeastern Pennsylvania used to have a thriving coal industry. It began to decline in the 1950s as the popularity of oil and natural gas increased. A completely preventable accident in 1959 would mark its end. The Knox Coal Company was feeling economic pressure thanks to the falling demand for coal. Management decided to meet these challenges by ordering miners to illegally dig beneath the Susquehanna River. Once the miners were beneath the river, they started digging up. Unfortunately, normal precautions were ignored. The miners didn't measure the thickness of the rock above them as they normally would. The result was a section of the roof gave way and water rushed into the tunnels. 12 workers died. Somehow, 69 succeeded in escaping a watery grave beneath the earth. Those who died were never recovered. Closing the hole that allowed water to pour into the tunnels also took 3 days. 10 people were indicted in the aftermath of the disaster. This included the company's president, owner, and several union officials. 6 of them served time in jail. The widows of those who died were unable to receive any benefits until 4 years after the disaster. Hans Hedtoft. The Titanic wasn't the only large ship to hit an iceberg then sink to the bottom of the ocean. It happened several times throughout the 20th century. Hans Hedtoft was a ship built in Denmark. It was 271 feet long and was intended to ferry passengers and cargo between Denmark and Greenland. The ship was also built with a riveted hull just like the Titanic was. The choice was criticized by several within Denmark as not being very resistant to collisions with ice. On January 7th, Hans Hedtoft began its maiden voyage. It left Copenhagen and completed a voyage to Greenland in record time. It spent several weeks there before finally heading home on January 29. The ship was returning to Denmark with 40 crew, 55 passengers, a cargo of frozen fish, and several tons of archives that recorded Greenland's history. On its second day, it was 35 miles south of Greenland. Without warning, the ship collided with an iceberg. A distress call was received by nearby ships at 1:56 p.m. stating that the Hans Hedtoft had struck an iceberg. Because of weather, aircraft would not be used to assist. The ships that received the distress call were too far away to help immediately. At 3:12 p.m., a message was received that said the Hans Hedtoft was sinking. At 5:41 p.m., another message was received stating again that the ship was sinking. Immediate assistance was repeatedly requested. By the time other ships were able to arrive, it was too late. The only item ever found from the wreckage was a personal flotation device that washed ashore in Iceland. Lives were lost, but so were genealogical records for the population of Greenland. This event also marks the last time an iceberg destroyed a commercial vessel. Tibetan Uprising. The 1950s were a busy decade for China. In 1951, the People's Republic of China reached an agreement which allowed them to take control of Tibet. It was called the 17-Point Agreement. In short, it allowed Tibet to retain some form of autonomy while recognizing it had to submit to Chinese rule. The Tibetan representatives who signed the agreement, according to some accounts, were not authorized to do so. The Dalai Lama was the religious leader of Tibet and the head of its government. After the agreement was signed in 1951, the United States informed the Dalai Lama that in order to receive aid, it would be necessary for him to leave Tibet and disavow any agreements reached with China. The Dalai Lama remained in Tibet, but tensions increased as the decade progressed. Under the original agreement, many of the communist reforms, such as land redistribution, were supposed to be delayed. The Chinese did not wait before enforcing the policies on various parts of Tibet. Armed rebellion against the Chinese government began in 1956. It was met with deadly force. Lhasa was the seat of the Tibetan government and home to the Dalai Lama. It continued to honor the 17-point agreement, even as other areas of Tibet refused to do so. This kept the peace for a few years. But in 1959, rumors began to spread within Lhasa that the Chinese government planned to arrest the Dalai Lama. On March 10th, several thousand Tibetans surrounded the Dalai Lama's palace to prevent him from leaving or being removed. They didn't want him to travel to a scheduled event in China, and they didn't want the Chinese government to be able to arrest him either. It didn't take long for the Tibetans in Lhasa to begin fighting with Chinese forces. On March 12th, they declared independence from China and began preparing to fight the Chinese military. Unfortunately, the Tibetans were outmatched. On March 17th, 2 artillery shells landed near the Dalai Lama's palace. This convinced him to finally flee Tibet. The following night, he left Lhasa with his family and a few officials. China still controls all of Tibet. Rocket mail. When the United States first created missile technology, it was primarily intended to deliver explosive death and nuclear destruction. By the end of the decade, the technology was used briefly to deliver mail. Individuals in Germany and India also used missiles to deliver mail in the 1930s. The idea worked if the rocket engine didn't explode. Unfortunately, explosions were more the rule than the exception. One of the final and most ambitious attempts to deliver mail with rocket technology happened on June 8, 1959. The USS Barbaro was a submarine located off the northern coast of Florida. The submarine removed the nuclear warhead from one of its cruise missiles and replaced it with 2 mail containers. Then the missile was launched to a naval station in Mayport, Florida. The mail was delivered, and the United States Postmaster General publicly praised the effort, claiming it would become a standard method of mail delivery within the next decade. Despite positive publicity, no further attempts were made to deliver mail with cruise missiles. It was not cost-effective, considering each missile cost at least $2 million. Clutter family murders. In 1959, Holcomb, Kansas was a small farming community. Herb Clutter was a prosperous farmer who lived in the area. Herb lived with his wife Bonnie and their 2 teenage daughters Nancy and Canyon. Nancy was 16 years old and Canyon was 15 years old. Both attended the local high school. On November 14th, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith were over 300 miles away on the other side of Kansas. Both men had been recently paroled from prison. Richard Hickok had a cellmate named Floyd Wells. Floyd worked as a farmhand for Herb before being sent to prison. Floyd told Richard that Herb kept lots of cash in his house. It was locked in a safe. When Richard Hickok was released from prison, he reached out to Perry Smith. The 2 created a plan to steal Herb Clutter's money. The truth is that Herb did business with checks. He almost never carried cash. Richard and Perry drove overnight to Holcomb, arriving at Herb Clutter's house in the morning. The pair entered the house through an unlocked door while the family was sleeping. Richard and Perry woke Herb, Bonnie, and the children. They discovered there was no safe. Not wanting to leave empty-handed, the entire family was tied and gagged. The 2 thieves searched the house but found little of value. Ultimately, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith decided it was better to not leave witnesses. Perry slit Herb Clutter's throat, then shot him in the head. Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon were each killed with a shotgun to the head. Perry Smith later said of Herb, I didn't want to harm the man. I thought he was a very nice gentleman, soft-spoken. I thought so right up to the moment I cut his throat. If you want to learn more about this event, it was documented in a Truman Capote book called In Cold Blood. Roseburg Blast. A completely preventable accident visited Roseburg, Oregon on October 7, 1959. George Rutherford was a truck driver for the Pacific Powder Company. He was driving a truck loaded with 2 tons of dynamite and 4.5 tons of blasting agent. Understandably, the Pacific Powder Company had told its drivers to not park these vehicles in congested areas. George Rutherford didn't listen very well. He parked his truck next to the Garretson Building Supply Company, which was in downtown Roseburg. The Garretson building caught fire that night. Firefighters arrived to extinguish the flames while a police officer named Donald de Suez and the chief of police worked to evacuate citizens. The 2 police officers died when the truck exploded. In total, 14 people died in the blast and 125 were injured. 300 businesses were destroyed by the blast. Most of downtown had to be rebuilt. Pat Sullivan was a bystander near the blast who survived. He gave the following account. I was about 20 feet from the intersection on Pine and Oak, and I could see Don de Suez in his Centennial police uniform outlined against the truck. Assistant Fire Chief McFarland and another fireman were standing down by the fire truck. A real good heavy blaze was going at that time. It was reaching well up. As I was running down, I started to see the sides of the truck starting to bulge and I hit the dirt. Thank God for Korea. And that was the last time I saw Don de Suez. I got hit in the chest with a piece of metal. I started to get up and the suction of the blast knocked me down again. The piece of metal went through the pack of cigarettes I had just bought and lodged in my chest. At that time, there were no lights whatsoever. Everything was completely dark except for the electrical cords that were bouncing around on the streets that had been blown down from the deal. The Pacific Powder Company was eventually forced to pay $1.2 million in damages. Nobody was ever held criminally responsible. We have now released a total of 10 episodes exploring the least known and most horrible events of the 1950s. It has been educational for us and hopefully for you as well. What have we learned? The United States lost a lot of nuclear weapons, which should probably scare everyone a lot more than it does. Airplane crashes and train wrecks were far more common back then, and living under communist rule didn't seem like much fun. In many ways, it's obvious that not much has changed. The human condition today is essentially the same as it has always been. The story of humanity is one of random events that end in pain, suffering, and death. If we're lucky, then we might have a good time along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, then please hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel. After all, you sat through this whole thing. Why shouldn't somebody else? And if you have a burning desire to make sure the depressing stories keep on coming, then consider becoming a patron. The link to our Patreon page is in the video description. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.